Support the author of today's story by going and checking out his YouTube channel, Black Volumes. He posts similar scary stories that you would find on this channel, and I think you'll really enjoy them. Give it a try. And without further ado, let's get into today's story. There are rules when it comes to time travel. Follow them, don't follow them, I don't really care at the end of the day. Sorry to be callous, but that's just the way I feel. And I certainly don't experience much in the way of feelings at all. Not anymore. Not since I lost Tommy. Not since I saw the embodiment or non-embodiment of that cosmic horror known only as the glassy-eyed man. I'm a shell of myself, and I spend most days wondering why I still cling to life at all. It all started when I traveled back in time. I'll give you this one warning. Don't ever try to change the past. But you won't listen, will you? That's okay. I wouldn't listen either. I'd probably still do it all again, and probably still try if I had the sanity or means to do so. Should you come into possession of the means to time travel, which you very well may if you use the boomerang, then you will want to take precautions. The boomerang will fling you back in time, but then it will drag you back to the present day. You have a window of opportunity, and that is a wondrous thing. But there are dangers to fiddling with the very fabric of reality. It doesn't matter how big or small the things you want to change from your past. You must follow these rules. When you travel back to a given point in time, do all that you must within the first 24 hours because time becomes strange after that. Respect the window of opportunity, as even the slightest change can have dire consequences. You don't want to draw the attention of the glassy-eyed man. Should you draw his attention, do not engage. But I'm not your mother, and do what you will. It's your call should you tread the path that I treaded. Should you traverse the temporal waves embedded within existence, just know that disobeying the laws of the universe and defying those glassy eyes belonging to the man who skulks beyond the edge of everything is a mistake made only by those who are reckless and foolhardy and magnetized to peril. I should know because I am one such person. What I will do, however, is tell you my tale of horror, and you'll come to understand why some threads of reality are best left untangled. This is the story of the punishment that I faced and still face for my crimes against reality. In 2022, my son Tommy died in a car accident. Not the unavoidable kind, the kind brought about by his father, my ex-husband Henry. An abusive monster who, in spite of his mistreatment to my son and me, managed to keep a stranglehold on our family long after my separation from him. And it was not only a stranglehold in a metaphorical sense, but a literal one. Somehow Henry managed to woo the jury and get shared custody of Tommy, despite their knowledge that he had kept the two of us locked up in our home for roughly a year, well after the end of the lockdown. Of course, that wasn't how Henry spun the story. Things had been deteriorating since 2020, but I told myself that I would take my toddler and run as soon as the lockdown measures had been lifted by the local government. However, Henry had become quite accustomed to the pandemic, quite accustomed to keeping us in sight. The signs of emotional abuse had been there long before that, but the power of locking us up indoors had transformed him into something far worse. He sensed that I was thinking of leaving with our son, so he started to prepare. We lived in a rural part of Scotland, and though we weren't physically caged up in there, Henry found plenty of ways to keep Tommy and I from escaping. We'd make it halfway across those acres of farmland, surrounding his parents' old property before the deranged maniac would catch up to us. He would chuckle as he walked hurriedly alongside us. "At least 20 miles," he would say smugly, hands in his pockets, as my 5-year-old son and I would pick up our feet and scurry more quickly across the grass, bags in hands. And that's how far you'll have to walk through fields, mountains, and forests before you reach the nearest town. You haven't got a phone, haven't got a car, haven't got food, haven't got water. How long will you last? He was right. Henry fed us, Henry gave us water, Henry made sure that we didn't have the means to escape, but he never locked the doors, never physically restrained us. He simply controlled our means of survival. The kitchen was kept under lock and key. I wouldn't be allowed in there to cook unless under his supervision. The car keys were who knows where. My phone was locked up. There wasn't a sharp object or blunt instrument on hand that could overpower him, and I never found the set of keys for the various locked rooms in our house, which would have undoubtedly provided some means of getting in the car or the food pantry, so as to give Tommy and I a chance out on the road. 10 miles, that was the furthest that we ever got. Tommy was only tiny and his legs couldn't carry him far before the hunger and thirst became too much. Maybe we could have made it the rest of the way through the wilderness. I certainly could have. But the thought of my boy dying of thirst or starvation in land without clean water or any food beyond a handle of pruny berries was too terrifying. I always ended up turning back. Always ended up taking Tommy back to Henry, and the boy's father would welcome us with smug arms. He would feed the boy and give him something to drink, but I would often be starved for a day or two to help me think about what I had done. Anyhow, I would watch the news on TV and see the rest of the world returning to normal. But things stayed the same for my son and me, as our husband imposed a lockdown of his own upon us. A police officer finally knocked on the door in early 2022 to do a welfare check on Tommy, as it had been reported that teachers were concerned about him continuing to do online lessons. Moreover, my uncle, my only living relative, was alarmed by my relative radio silence over the past months. Save for a handful of approved Christmas and birthday messages signed off by Henry, before my old phone would be returned to its lockbox. I had hardly been much of a social media user before my husband's strict measures, starting in late 2020. But my absence was noted by those who knew me before the pandemic began. Anyway, I revealed everything to the police officer and I thought that that would be the end of it. Thought that Henry would go to prison. Of course, being an investment banker, he had the money for the best lawyer around. He managed to put together a tall tale about being concerned for the welfare of my son and me, in light of the pandemic, so he was too scared to let us all back out into the real world. Shared custody. I don't know how he wrangled it, but he did. The jury believed that he had been anxious, frightened of the virus, only trying to protect his wife and son from the outside world. Of course, he was able to masterfully manipulate them. He had done so to me for years. That was how I fell in love with him in the first place. And this horror story is only the preamble to the true tale of terror, of course, but it's a necessary one. The real story starts a year later when my abusive former spouse brought my world to an end. In a drunken stupor while driving Tommy home at the end of a weekend stay, Henry careened off a country road and plowed his car directly into an oak tree. The paramedics declared my ex-husband and my son dead on impact. At least that's what my sister told me later. I was so distraught and mentally undone by the ordeal that I hardly registered anything told to me for many days and weeks. But that isn't the horror story that you're waiting to hear, is it? A tale of a terrifying and abusive husband. A tale of a nightmarish manslaughter. A tale of a grieving mother. No, you want to know what I mean when I say that there are rules when it comes to time travel. You want to know how Earth time travel could be possible at all. I don't doubt you for doubting me because that was exactly how I felt when Bradley Hall told me the same thing. What did you just say to me? I hissed at my neighbor. Bradley gulped. Listen, Mara, I wasn't trying to. Do you think that it's funny? I wheezed. Do you think that joking around about such a thing is going to put a smile on my face?" "I'm not joking," Bradley insisted, holding his hands up defensively. He looked frightened that I might lamp him with my balled-up fist, and he was right to be frightened of that. "Mara, you've known me for 10 years. Tell me you know that I'd never be so cruel. And tell me that you know I'm serious. You see it in my eyes, I know you do." I did, but what he had just claimed was impossible. Absolutely impossible. "Bradley, my son is dead," I whispered. "He's not coming back. I don't know what the hell's wrong with you." "Nothing's wrong with me," Bradley promised. "Mara, there's a way to go back and fix things. I know because it happened to me last night. Lisa Monroe, you remember her, right? From the school runs with little Samantha and Tommy back in the day." I became quite pale at the mention of not only my dead son's name, but Bradley's comatose daughter. She had been in the hospital for quite some years, following some sort of bike accident on a nearby road. But then Bradley Hall told me something that simply did not add up with my worldview. "Lisa gave me something, Mara," my neighbor continued, plunging his hand into his trouser pocket. "Something that took me back in time and saved Samantha." I frowned. "She's better. I thought she was still in the hospital." "She is," Bradley said. I frowned more deeply. "Then I don't understand." "Mara, reality wasn't this way 24 hours ago," Bradley explained. "Not for me. My Samantha died during that bike accident 3 years ago. But then I went back and saved her. Well, as best as I could. The car still hit her. The universe works in strange ways like that. But she didn't die. She ended up in that comatose state." I nodded slowly, thinking that my dear old neighbor had lost his mind. Perhaps the grief of seeing his daughter in a vegetative, near brain-dead state had been compounded by the death of Tommy. Whatever the case, it seemed insensitive. To suggest that such science fiction nonsense could be true was absolutely deplorable as far as I was concerned. But out of respect for Samantha and Bradley, I held my tongue. It took all of my will, as I've been quite loose-tongued as of late. Grief is my excuse, but maybe I'm just unleashing my true self. "I have to make myself some dinner now, Bradley," I whispered, nodding towards the front door from my house and heading across the road. "I'm starting to eat properly just as you've been nagging me for." "I know you don't believe me," Bradley interrupted, finally producing a small, stone-like object from his pocket. "But take a look at this first, will you?" And then I found myself doing the inexplicable. Rather than yelling at the man for his insanity and his insensitivity at such a trying time for me, I actually gave him the time of day. It wasn't a courtesy this time, but a deep and compelling urge. I was entirely transfixed by the little metallic pebble in the man's palm, as if it were speaking to me, calling words at an unheard register, yet something in my brain or body or soul heard. Whatever I may or may not have believed about my old friend and his ridiculous tale, I was walking back towards the pavement, back towards my neighbor with his outstretched hand and the strange pebble sitting atop his palm. "What is it?" I asked. "It's already told you the answer to that question," Bradley replied gently. "I know that you hear it, Mara, even if you don't fully understand or believe that you do yet." "Hear what?" I asked. "Exactly what I heard when Lisa Monroe gave me the beautiful thing last night," he continued. "Hope." "Don't talk in riddles to me, Bradley," I sighed. "I'm so tired, broken, unwell. I don't have the time for—" "Samantha was dead, Mora," he interrupted again. "I know you don't believe that, but she was dead. In the old timeline. Before I changed things. Maybe that timeline's gone now. Maybe I've erased it. Or maybe I've simply slipped into the alternate reality where my daughter is alive. In a coma perhaps, but alive. That's why I count my blessings every day. God, did people treat me strangely during those early days? You remember, acted like I wasn't grieving enough. Well, that was because I had already grieved my daughter's loss in another timeline, so having her back alive at all in any form was a gift to me. The boomerang is a gift. Boomerang? I asked, frowning at the pebble still sitting on that extended palm. It doesn't look like a boomerang to me. That's what Lisa called it, he said. I know very little about how it works, what it is. I know as much as you know in a way. I know only that it was speaking to me, whispering its secrets in some twisted and unholy way. But we'll do the unholiest things for our children, won't we, Mora? I shook my head. I think I'm done with this conversation now, Bradley. And then my neighbor's eyes welled. Please, Mora, you have to go back. You have to save Tommy because, well, I changed more than I meant to change. I frowned. What on earth are you talking about? I'm talking about your son, Mora, Bradley whispered. In the old timeline, he was alive and well. I don't know what I did, but I suppose the butterfly effect is true. I saved Samantha, but then I came back to a present day in a timeline with no Tommy. My eyes widened, and before I knew it, I was at the man's throat. All of a sudden, I believed him. Every last word of his tale. I felt it deep in my bones. He wasn't playing some cruel, practical joke. He was confessing the wrong that he had done. And willingly or unwillingly though this mistake may have been, the fact remained that he had killed my son. That was all I could think as I saw red. Please, he choked as my hands wrapped around his throat. It was an act over which I barely had any control. An unconscious act, driven by a mother's primal rage. Please, Mora, I didn't mean to. Undo it, I hissed. That's why, he croaked, shaking the pebble in his free hand as his face turned white. He didn't resist, however, for he seemed to agree that he deserved it. That's why I'm offering this to you. I released the man's throat and let him speak. Bradley rubbed his neck. You can go back, find a way to save Tommy, but maybe my little Samantha will be okay too. She can stay in that coma, you don't have to fix that, you know. You don't have to fix everything. First, tell me what it is, I said, nodding at the pebble. Properly, I mean, not just that it can take me back. Not just that it can fix things. How does it work? What is it really? I don't know, the man admitted wheezily, throat hoarse from the throttling to which I had subjected my neighbor. I wasn't even given instructions by Lisa Monroe. She told me that I would know how to use it, know how to save Samantha. The boomerang would tell me apparently. And she was right. Please tell me that you feel it too, Mora. Even looking at this thing, you understand its purpose. I know you do. I did. I've never been overcome by such dread in my life, but I understood the object in the man's hand. First of all, I felt my heart slow, Bradley continued, placing the device in my palm and pulling his own hand away. The device was both cold and warm, and though I heard no words and hardly understood a thing that was happening, I knew it was all real, and that this boomerang really was the way to travel back in time and save my son. Then every other part of my body slowed down and the world outside of my body quickly followed. Soon enough, things weren't slowing anymore. They had stopped completely. Time froze. And then a few seconds later, time began to reverse, quicker and quicker with every passing second. Before I knew it, space and time were racing past my field of view in a blur. I time traveled 3 years backwards, thanks to the boomerang, and then time came to a halt. A few moments later, it pushed forwards at a normal speed, a natural speed. I saved Samantha, and then I was boomeranged forwards in time to the present day at a faster speed. I'll do it, I said. I'll go back and save Tommy. I know, Bradley said. I knew that before you did. But there are rules before you use this gift, Mora. Don't squeeze it just yet. Rules? I asked. Bradley nodded, holding out a hand, cautioning me. I know you're itching to see your son again, to save him just as I had saved Samantha. But I urge you not to make the same mistake as me. I don't want to be responsible for somebody else getting hurt. Do you? I'll do anything for my boy just like you said, I whispered. My neighbor frowned. Well, that was the kind of thinking that I had. The kind of thinking that stole Tommy from this world and caused you to nearly kill me in the street. I would do the same thing, I said, starting to massage the pebble and dance my fingers across it. Bradley could sense that I was moments away from squeezing it and testing my own sanity, testing whether this time boomerang was real or just a figment of our shared hallucination. The rules, my neighbor hurriedly said. Pay attention, Mora. Firstly, you have 24 hours before time starts to become noticeably faster. When you use this device, you'll always be boomeranging back to the present day, so be quick with whatever you plan to do. Secondly, keep your goal narrow, as hungering for more will only land you in a heap of trouble. Lisa Monroe is a frail and lonely woman these days, isn't she? Her children don't speak to her. She wouldn't speak about it, but I know she pushed things too far with the boomerang. That's why she wanted to get rid of it. I can only imagine what her old timeline was like before she meddled with the past. Can only imagine what horror she endured if she no longer wants to use it at all. But that won't stop you, not with your son on the line. Thirdly and lastly, do not ever engage with the glassy-eyed man. I raised a brow. I beg your pardon. You'll know him, when you see it, Bradley explained. He is the final arbiter of all matters in this and every universe. He lies beyond the cracks of reality. He judges those who meddle too greatly with the rightful order and occurrence of things. I don't know how I know those things. Maybe the boomerang spoke the truth to me. Maybe the glassy-eyed man spoke the truth to me. Either way, I escaped that shadowy figure by a hair's breadth. And I'll tell you this, you'll never be the same after seeing him. And I'm sure all would be far worse if he were to ever get a hold of you. I was entirely baffled by this man's new addition to a story already too ludicrous to be believed. This time I didn't take a single word of Bradley's explanation seriously. The boomerang told me nothing of a man with glassy eyes, a shadowy entity from another plane of existence. It told me only of the utopia that awaited me once I was reunited with my son. I realized now that the boomerang was goading me. It wanted me to travel back in time for some nefarious reason. The idea of it being sentient at all is one that still haunts me, and if you're hoping for answers from the rest of my story, you'll be sorely disappointed. I only have a tale of terror to tell. An account of the awfulness that befell me when I finally squeezed the boomerang. And it was as Bradley Hall had promised it would be. There came a physical and psychological nightmare like no other from my life up until that point. I felt the very makeup of my body begin to grind to a halt, as if I had waded into some dense sludge, as if quicksand itself were gobbling up my paralyzed body and sliding me into its gullet. And there was no denying the truth of the story and the purpose of the device, as the environment surrounding me started to grind to a halt too. Before I knew it, the world had paused, time had paused, and then came the part that left me truly nauseated and disoriented. The clock started winding backwards, and I watched as the timeline reversed, watched as my own life reversed and the boomerang flung me back in time. Flung me back a month, as if it had sensed the exact moment in space and time that I was hoping to reach. The day on which Tommy went to his father's house for the weekend. It was Friday afternoon, 48 hours before Henry would get behind the wheel with 3 bottles of whiskey sloshing around in his gut and drive my son Tommy into a tree. There would be no such turn of events this time. I promised that to myself and Tommy. Wherever he might be on that day from the past, I would burn the whole world down for that boy. And Bradley Hall berated himself for unwittingly sentencing my child to death by altering time to save his daughter. But the truth was that I would have wittingly and quite gladly done the very same thing, if not worse. I would kill for that boy, and I was willing to do so. I wasn't sure whether such a notion was driven by my grief about Tommy, my anger at Bradley, or some manner of supernatural possession from the boomerang in my clenched fist. Whatever the case, I had done it. I had returned to a point in time at which my son was still alive, and I knew that because of what I could see before me. I was standing on the pavement opposite my driveway where I had been talking with Bradley Hall only moments earlier, or a month in the future, I had to remind myself. And dead ahead, sitting on the living room sofa and playing video games, was my 11-year-old son, Tommy. "Tommy!" I cried out as I ran across the road on that warm spring day and tore across the driveway. My feet barely touched the tarmac or the paving slabs as I gunned for the front door. It flung open in my hand, startling my son from the room adjacent to the hallway. He spun around on his seat, and then came the screen informing him that some Fortnite player had just shot him, bringing his battle royale to a close. "Mom!" Tommy huffed and groaned when he had turned back to the screen to see that he had lost. Had not, in fact, claimed a winner-winner chicken dinner. "You scared the poop out of me and made me lose the game." "Language, Tommy," I cautioned with tears in my eyes and joyous laughter in my lips as I rushed towards my son, who from my perspective had been resurrected. "I said poop." Tommy chuckled as I lunged over the back of the sofa and wrapped my arms around him. Mom, what are you doing? Get off me, weirdo." "I love you, Tommy," I moaned. "Okay," my son muttered uncomfortably, finally shrugging me off him. "Is that because I'm going to Dad's house this weekend?" I gulped. There it was, the reason for being there. The thing I needed to fix should I have a hope of saving Tommy's life. "I'd better go unpack my things, actually." Tommy continued, checking the time on his phone. "Dad'll be here in about a half hour or so." "No," I croaked. "Don't go." My son frowned. "But you said the judge is making—" "I don't care," I murmured. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right now, I just want you and I to, I don't know, enjoy the weekend. Do something fun." "Mom, I'll only be with him for 2 days," Tommy whispered, eyes looking a little wide and timid, as they often did before he spent the weekend with his father. "Dad doesn't do bad things anymore. He's not good, but he's safe, I promise. 2 days and I'll be home." I hated that. Hated how mature my 11-year-old son sounded. It wasn't right. Henry had forced the child to grow up so quickly during the pandemic. The boy's father had been driven into such a deranged mindset that Tommy quickly learned, as I did, that a sturdy disposition was absolutely essential to survive in that house, to survive Henry. It sickened and still sickens me that the jury did not see what I saw in my ex-husband. They were swept off their feet by that charming demon in much the same way as I had been. So before Henry had a chance to woo any other gullible persons who might hand over my baby to him, I walked around to the front of the sofa, took Tommy's hand, and guided him up to his feet. "Pack your things, Tommy," I said. My son frowned. "Mom, it's okay." "It's not okay," I said in a fractured, croaky tone, eyeing my son with a wild gaze that seemed to get through to him, seemed to communicate that something very bad was about to happen, should we linger for too long. We had to get out of that house before my ex-husband's car pulled onto the driveway, for Tommy would die if he were to go on that weekend visit to his father's house. "Okay," my son hoarsely replied, brilliant mind seeming to read through the lines, and then he scurried out of the living room and up the stairs. I followed him upstairs with labored breath, winded from anxiety more than physical exertion, and I dashed into my room. Clothes and toiletries flew into a suitcase, and the two of us were back on the landing within 60 seconds. "Mom, are we going to be all right?" Tommy asked meekly, clutching his own little rucksack with whitening knuckles. I gulped and nodded, tears in my eyes. "We are now, Tommy." The two of us rushed down the stairs, across the hallway, and through the front door. My arms ached from carrying my bulky suitcase in both arms, but I felt powered onwards by the glad sight of an empty residential street ahead. Henry's Ford Focus was not trundling down the road towards our driveway. We had time to get away. "It's just for the weekend," I promised, but I knew that it was a lie. Even if I were to successfully change the past and save my son's life, what then? A few weeks or months from then, it would just happen again. Henry would get behind the wheel with too much liquor in his system. He wasn't ever going to change. If anything, he was only going to get worse. That's how abusers evolve. And by the time a jury would be wise enough to see through his deception and charm, it would be too late. Tommy would die in some other horrific car accident, or perhaps another horrendous form of abuse. Maybe in Henry's own home. Nowhere was safe from that monster. Henry had never laid a finger on his son, but he had come close to doing so to me. One night, in a drunken rage, he raised a hand which quivered in the air. He had been considering it, sending the back of his hand across my cheek. He had resisted the urge that day, and Tommy and I made it out a few weeks later. But it was only a matter of time before Henry discovered that part of himself. The part that transcended acts of emotional abuse, easily redressed and justified to the gullible jurors of the Crown Court. The point was that I realized we couldn't just run away for that weekend. I didn't care about the court-mandated shared custody of our child. I had to save Tommy's life for more than just a handful of days. I had to save him from his father for the remainder of his days. But the boy didn't need to know that. As much as he feared his father, the child would have likely been conflicted about being torn away like that. I was just grateful that he was climbing into the car with me and agreeing to skip the weekend with his dad. "Where are we going, Mom?" Tommy asked. I shivered as I started the engine. "I don't know, kid. On a road trip, I suppose." We followed town roads, country lanes, and motorways across the country, traveled for hours and hours into the night. As we drove, I ignored the notifications on my phone, which clung to the inner windscreen above the dashboard. The messages and missed calls from Henry overlaying the Google Maps app, which was displaying no destination at all. It was only open out of habit. Eventually, I searched for nearby Holiday Inns and I selected the closest one. "Shouldn't we answer?" Tommy asked as we pulled into the car park and Henry called for the 13th or 14th time. I shook my head. "No, Tommy, we shouldn't. Your dad isn't safe to be around right now." My son nodded and sniffled. Tommy had been a single-digit age when we last lived with his father, but he remembered how Henry had been when he was angry. In fact, it was harder to remember how the man had been when he wasn't angry, as that was a distant memory from long before the pandemic. Long before lockdown and isolation from the world drove the man to lunacy. Or at least brought out the lunacy that had always been burgeoning just a tad beneath the surface. I sleepwalked through booking the room, taking the key card from the receptionist, and leading my boy up to the second floor with our things. I had sleepwalked through the entire road trip to that town, whose name I could barely remember. I checked Google Maps on my phone, as ridiculous as that sounds, to see where we were. Some town called Heavens. Do you know, I don't remember. It wasn't important. Nothing was important to me but my son. And I'm sure you're all listening with wide ears as I talk about the impossibility of having traveled back in time, thanks to a tiny silver pebble which was sitting in my pocket. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. Cosmic impossibilities of science fiction or supernatural proportions. They pale in comparison to the primitive elation of being reunited with one's own child. It was an indescribable feeling. Once we were locked safely in that hotel room and I felt that I could breathe again, I let the tears flow. My boy Tommy was alive, and I was going to make sure that he didn't end up in that car with his father on Sunday evening, that he didn't end up crushed in a heap of metal and tree bark. "Mom, why are you crying?" Tommy asked, having dumped his rucksack on his bed and come rushing over to me to offer a hug. I tightly embraced my boy and answered through sobs, "Oh, I was just scared, Tommy, but we're safe now. You're safe now." "Thank you, Bradley Hall," I whispered after my son and I untangled from our embrace, and I looked down at my pocket, at the pebble shape protruding through the fabric. "I forgive you now, Bradley. You did what a father must do for his girl, and I did what a mother must do for her boy. You saved your Samantha, and I saved my Tommy. We both got what we wanted, and we didn't break any rules. We toed the line, sure, I won't lie about that. We changed things. Mankind wasn't built to travel through time, but we're okay now. We're okay because we didn't get greedy. Now the universe can leave us alone, and we can leave it alone. I'll throw this pebble away, throw it into the depths of some ocean." And the harrowing thing is that I actually believed it. It helped me drift off to sleep, the best sleep that I had had in weeks, because it was the first night in which I could close my eyes and know that my little Tommy was still alive. Alive and well, snoring softly in the single bed adjacent to mine. And that sound, as frustrating as it might have been before all of this nightmare began, was the most soothing white noise that I think I had ever heard in my life. It sang me to sleep. A wheezy lullaby that took me to the land of Nod. Took me into a dream of black, endless black. And there appeared to be something drowning in that black sea, but it wasn't drowning at all. Only helpless things drown. No, this thing was swimming. And it was two things actually. Two round, white things like little pebbles floating to shore. Floating towards me. The woman who stood in the darkness and looked down at the lapping, frothing tide of darkness, bringing those two white, not pebbles, I realized in horror. The two things were sticking too firmly together, as if bound to the same thing. And they were bound to the same thing. They weren't pebbles at all, in fact, but eyes. Glassy eyes. Glassy eyes of some black thing that barely had a form in that black place. But I realized that may well be its form. A formless thing trying its best to present itself in a tangible physical way to a mortal being living in a tangible and physical realm. I don't think this thing had a shape or even had eyes, but I knew its name. The glassy-eyed man. And then I awoke in a sweat. I was sitting upright and glancing around the black room. Tommy was sleeping soundly in the bed next to mine, and I reached for the bedside table to see the time. 3:34. Of course, it would be such an unholy time like that. It was always some unholy time such as that when I woke from my bad dreams. Only the bad dreams were usually about Henry. About the atrocities he committed all in the name of protecting Tommy and me. That old lie. But I've always been one to dream about reality, even when I was a little girl. My dreams about Henry were grounded in things happening to me in the real world, and in much the same way as horrible as it seemed. I realized my dream about this glassy-eyed man was grounded in the real world too. I wanted to dismiss it. Wanted to call it some ghost story that Bradley Hall had told me to perhaps keep me in check. abiding by the time travel rules of the pebble. But then I heard myself speaking inwardly. Time travel, I thought. If such a cosmic impossibility is possible, then what else might be possible? Maybe non-physical beings from beyond the fabric of our universe. Beings with glassy eyes that watch over those sinners who dare to fiddle and meddle with the timeline. I felt it. Outside the window to our hotel room, there was something watching us. I didn't question how I knew that. I just clambered to my feet and walked over to the window as quietly as possible, tiptoeing so as to not stir Tommy from his deep slumber. Not out of respect for his REM cycle, but because he had always been a curious and stubborn boy, which he inherited from his mother. If he had woken to see me walking over to the window, he would have wanted to know why. He would have wanted to look. And I knew even before I looked that Tommy should not see what I was about to see. I parted the drapes in the middle ever so slightly, just enough to poke one half of my face through the opening and look out at the car park below with one eye. The world outside was black, save for a few lampposts illuminating the small Holiday Inn parking area, consisting of about 40 spaces in 4 rows. And standing on the road at the middle of it all was something revealed boldly and brashly by the artificial light, yet not boldly at all. For this was not a thing that could be revealed. I had already learned as much from my terrible nightmare. It was the glassy-eyed man. He was standing, a silhouetted figure with 2 blazing white pinpricks on what may have been his face, and he was looking up at our second-floor hotel room window. Looking at me if he could look at all, if he had eyes at all. As I say, it was the strangest thing, and that's the most pleasant way in which to put it. The truth is that I've only ever been more terrified when recalling that moment, because the greatest horror is that the man is near impossible to remember. It's as if my brain has scrubbed whatever it knew of the glassy-eyed man's appearance from my brain. There had to be more to him than a silhouette and white eyes. There had to be. Maybe if so, his appearance had to be scrubbed from my memory bank to save my very sanity, to save my very soul. I put a hand to my mouth and stumbled back from the curtains, letting them pull shut, and as I backed towards my bed on knocking knees, trying desperately to tread carefully so as to not wake Tommy, I felt a strange sickness come over me. It was a peculiar thing to feel so scared by a figure standing still at night. After all, I could have convinced myself that the lamppost might not have been that bright, or might not have been clearly revealing those slightly darker patches of the car park, meaning a perfectly ordinary man had been reduced to a quite formidable and frightening-looking stranger in the dark. If that line of thinking hadn't worked, I could have even convinced myself that I hadn't woken from my nightmare, that it was all still a dream. But no line of reasoning would have worked because I felt it in my gut. Felt those glassy eyes looking into my soul long before I even opened the curtains. Just as I felt that glassy-eyed man was the most dangerous and unstoppable force that I had ever beheld. Far more frighteningly powerful than the boomerang knocking about in my pocket of my trousers, which were lying across the armchair to one side of the room. This was a being so terrifying that even while standing still he seemed to pursue. And that was because he wasn't really standing still at all. He was in all places at all times. I truly believe that, and I still do. Even now, long after everything has come to pass, I still feel him watching me, still feel those glassy pinpricks observing from the dark. If he were so willing, the glassy-eyed man could well have appeared at the foot of my bed in that hotel room. But that didn't stop me from tucking myself back under my duvet and holding it up to my chin. As if that would do a thing to save me. To save my boy. I looked across to Tommy and said a prayer in my head. Prayed to that deity or universal arbiter. I'm sorry, I thought. Whatever I've done to interfere with your plan, I'm sorry. But don't punish him, please don't punish him. He's only a boy. He's my boy and I would do anything for him. I would face any punishment, Take me instead. I know that's an obvious thing to offer, but take me, please, I beg you. I prayed that the glassy-eyed man would show mercy for altering the events of the past. After all, he had gifted Bradley Hall with Samantha's life. Yes, she remained in a comatose state at our local hospital, but she was alive. He was alive. It was me who had been punished for Bradley's insolence. And that was when I was overcome by rage. Why was the glassy-eyed man watching me? Why was he threatening and cautioning me with those eyes? Tommy was never supposed to die. I growled inwardly as I lay awake in that bed, while the minutes ticked by and dawn approached. He died only because Bradley changed the past. I'm just fixing his mess. I'm just putting things back to how they were supposed to be. He did wrong, not me. Punish him. I felt a little disgusted with myself for thinking such a thing, but then I realized it wouldn't matter anyway, none of it. The glassy-eyed man was the thing that would prove the ultimate decider. I doubted he had a moral compass. He simply swore allegiance to the universe, to the preservation of reality and its fundamentals. He wasn't trying to punish me, he didn't care about who was to blame for this untethering of the timeline. So yes, Bradley Hall had unraveled the rightful course of events and killed my son by saving his daughter. But I was only unraveling the timeline further by traveling back and making my own amendments. For all I knew, I was killing somebody else's, or maybe simply killing a little butterfly somewhere else in the world. That's how people talk about the effect, isn't it? Every little thing matters, I'm sure. That was how the cosmic entity saw it. It wasn't how I saw it, but I knew it was how everything seemed from the eyes of that unfeeling thing. That unfeeling and unthinkably powerful thing. And perhaps it was right, for it was a far higher being than me. I mean, what do I know? I'm just an ape. But this ape wanted only to save its child. Forget about the universe. Mom! I woke up to Tommy shaking me by the shoulders, sunlight pouring through the window. It was noon according to my phone. The two of us had slept in, which surprised me at first, to be exact. I was surprised that I had fallen asleep at all. I had been kept so rigidly upright in my bed, duvet to my chin, by the fear of that entity emerging from the black in our room. Its white eyes would lap against my shore, brought by that dark wave that I had seen in my dream. But at some point it seemed I had finally drifted off to sleep. Perhaps around dawn, and in that sense it made perfect sense that I was waking up at noon. It made less for Tommy, as the lazy boy must have slept for half a day at that point, but regardless, I was on alert. I hadn't wanted to hang around in one place for that long. My head felt heavy. Time felt heavy. Everything felt different from the day before. When you travel back to a given point in time, do all that you must within the first 24 hours, because time becomes strange after that. The first rule rang in my head, and that's when it all made sense. I was boomeranging. Time had rapidly raced a month backwards to get me to that point in space and time, and now time was starting to pull forwards at a quickening pace. But it was okay. I had done what I needed to do. I had saved Tommy and I was done. But are you done? I wondered. You're still on the run. This wasn't part of the plan. You were meant to get him away from his father for the weekend and then be done with it. Let the natural course of events unfold. You're still fiddling, meddling, changing things. But changing what? Came the contrarian voice in my head. This is a new timeline now. I'm just doing what I always should have done. Getting Tommy well away from his dad. Screw the court, screw the law. Screw everything but Tommy. I'm just doing what I'm doing this because he died, I realized. I'm changing things based on my knowledge of a past that I've overwritten. Crap, and I'm still changing things. That's why the glassy-eyed man is watching. I'm fiddling too greatly with the timeline. I'm doing too much. I need to go home, let Tommy go to school, lead a normal life, even if that includes Henry. even if that puts my boy at risk. The phone rang. It was a rapid ring, a rapid thrum like that of my heartbeat. Everything was becoming so fast. That entire day became a blur, in fact. I was faintly cognizant of Tommy saying things at a million miles per hour, faintly cognizant of the 137 missed calls and 27 unread texts from Henry. I had been deleting the messages one by one without bothering to read them. Well, it was less that I wasn't bothering and more that I didn't want them to bother me. But in the blur of speeding up time, I read one notification that stood out over the others and pained my heart sharply. If you won't do it the court's way, we'll have to do it my way again. I remember it, the rapid rush of time, the blur of shapes and sounds. Maybe I was holding a conversation with my boys, time sped up. Or maybe I became a zombie-like husk, hurrying us into my car and heading back on the road to take us far away from Henry. I know that I sodded it all. Sodded the sensible part of my brain telling me to get Tommy home and start leading a normal life again. But I threw caution to the wind, threw the rules to the wind. And I remember one other thing. I remember driving down a dark country lane that night, the environment rushing past in a blur, and then swerving around a figure in the road. A figure with eyes like headbeams blinding me from the other side of the road. Maybe it was just another car coming the other way. I'm sure that's how Tommy saw it. I'm sure he was simply grateful that I saved our lives. But I know what it really was and who it really was. The glassy-eyed man. He was watching and he was getting closer because I was trying too hard to fight the will of the universe. I needed to let things be as Bradley had with Samantha. The universe had granted him his daughter's life, though she had ended up in a comatose state. Maybe the same would be true for Tommy, but I felt sick at such a thought. Sick at the idea of leaving his fate up to some higher power. Sick at the idea of relinquishing control to something greater than me. I knew the glassy-eyed man was trying to reach and punish me for meddling with the timeline, just as Bradley warned, but I didn't care. My head throbbed as we swerved past him, but I didn't care about that either. Tommy's voice jabbered at a speed far too quick to untangle, words far too high-pitched and sped up to discern. All I thought was that I needed to get us far, far away from that thing in the road. The road and the world and Tommy's questions about where we were heading next on our flee across the country. All those many facets of reality started to blur together and become deafening noise and blinding color. And then reality's mad dash forward in time became too quick to follow it all. When I re-entered the present day, I felt light, felt that the boomerang had let go of me, had released me from its time-traveling clutch. I was normal again, the world was normal again. These were the lies that I told myself as I smiled, teary-eyed, at the young boys sitting on the bed opposite from mine. There we were in another hiding place, another hotel room, another day of a long month on the run. But we were safe and we were alive. He was safe, he was alive, and that was all I truly cared about. But the new timeline was worse than I could have imagined. You see, as much as I told myself and my son that we were running from Henry, only I knew the truth, that we were running from something far greater and far more terrifying. Something with a purpose that would not be denied. Not by a mother, no matter how strong her will. And worst of all, we were running from something that could not be outrun. And these were the facts that came rushing back into my brain as it caught up to the past month of the new timeline. The 4 weeks through which I had rushed at an unbelievable speed, and assumedly acted normally, made the decisions that Mara would usually make, thought the things that Mara would usually think. It was a time travel hangover in a sense. I was just picking through the fog and haze of the night before to remember what had happened. Only it wasn't a single night that I was trying to remember. It was an entire month. And it wasn't a hangover that pounded through my every waking thought. It was a nightmare during which I had defied the very laws of the universe. Firstly, I remembered that we were on the run, as we had been for those past 4 weeks. We hadn't returned home because Henry would find us. We had been living out of hotels and even my compact, insufficient Fiat 500 on a few occasions. Family and friends had been trying to contact me every single day. I had missed calls and messages from more than just Henry, as people were worried about where I had gone. Some were worried that Henry had done something to me. Nearly all of them knew that he was to blame in some way. They just didn't know how. They knew that was why I'd run, and that was enough. But as that last, hazy month returned to my memories, I recalled there was more than that. I had to take out cash and start paying for small, family-run bed and breakfasts that way, as the police were looking out for my name at hotels. I had been reported missing and as having essentially kidnapped my son. Henry had the law on his side, which was a dangerous thing with a monster like him. Loved ones offered to hold us up. Uncle Brian used to be a lawyer and he left a message saying that he would be able to help me out of this mess. He just wanted to see Tommy and me safe. I know that he was telling the truth. I know he likely would have been able to help me in court, but he wasn't able to stop Henry from getting custody of Tommy in the first place. And even if my abusive ex-husband could be placated, all would not be well. I was constantly on the move because I was afraid that, should I stand still for too long in any one place, I would come face to face with the glassy-eyed man, that monster seeking to punish me for altering time itself. My memory of the new timeline was fuzzy and it felt as if somebody else had been living it. I know that it was me racing through time thanks to the boomerang and living those days, making those decisions, thinking those thoughts. It all just feels like somewhat of a dream. It's impossible to explain and I really wouldn't want any of you to understand. I'm just hoping my story is sufficient to deter you from ever getting your hands on a boomerang and trying to change your past too. You see, it may seem as if I had it all. I saved Tommy, kept him alive in the present. But that day I made it back and started to experience time again is the day that the nightmare came to its hellish conclusion. One night in yet another hotel room, my son and I both woke to the sound of shouting and yelling and hollering coming from outside the window. This time, we were on the ground floor of what was a rather titchy bed and breakfast with a rather titchy car park outside. I didn't feel as safe, didn't feel as sheltered from the outside. And with Tommy sitting upright in his own bed, shivering in the dark, I felt even more vulnerable. "Go back to bed, Tommy," I pleaded as a man yelled outside. "Please just..." "That's him, isn't it?" Tommy whimpered, eyes teary. "Mom, I told you that we should just go to the police. I told you that running from him was only going to make it worse. And now he's going to hurt us. Or worse, take me away from you." "There's worse than even that, Tommy," I thought, heart thumping as I climbed out of bed. Something worse than Henry. Something that won't just take you away from me, but take you away from the world itself. I didn't say any of that aloud. Didn't have the strength to say any of it aloud. I walked over to the window and drew the curtains again. This time, as I had feared and Tommy had already distinguished from the familiar voice, it wasn't the glassy-eyed man. It was indeed Henry, and he was screaming, "Mora! Tommy!" And then his voice lessened a little and he cleared his throat. "I love you both, okay? I'm not angry. I don't care what you've seen online or in the news, I'm not angry. I don't blame you for going crazy. I just want you to get the help you need. Now come out here and come home with me. You and Tommy, come on. We need to go." I whispered to my son and I smiled a little as I saw him already starting to pack his bag. "He's going to send you to prison," Tommy blubbered. I shook my head, packing my own bag in the dark. I didn't want to turn on a light as Henry would have immediately known which room we were staying in. He likely wants to get the court to send me to a psychiatric hospital, Tommy. That's where he always wanted to send me back when we all lived together. Remember? He wanted everybody to think that I was the crazy one. A hospital, my son repeated breathlessly, slipping his rucksack onto his back. That doesn't sound any better. I wheeled my suitcase away from the bed, grabbed my son's hand, and nodded at the hotel room door. Come on, baby, let's go. I ushered Tommy out of the room and down the corridor towards the fire exit that the owner had pointed out on the ground floor when we had first arrived. But then came the thump of the front doors to the tiny bed and breakfast swinging open, and I turned to look down the long corridor at the reception area of the 2-floor family business on a quiet residential street. There, standing in the reception with balled fists, was my furious ex-husband. Mora! Henry screamed at the top of his lungs from the other end of the corridor, and then he began to scream incoherently, descending into one of his rages, one of his black spells. Only this was blacker than any I had seen before. Gripped by terror, I suddenly realized I wasn't going to be sent to the psychiatric hospital. I was going to be sent to the grave if my unhinged ex-husband caught up to us. Run! I yelled at Tommy, dropping my suitcase to the carpet. The two of us darted to the fire exit and pushed it open together, and then we made it down the side of the building, beelining for my car parked next to the main road of that sleepy village. But Henry was too quick. Too horribly, impossibly quick. He reached up to the two of us before I managed to get the car door open and slammed into me. I screamed out in pain, hand and wrist crumpling against the metal bodywork of my car. There came cracking bones with the screams, and multiple bones fractured in my hand, wrist, and arm. But I didn't notice any of that at the time. I was too busy turning to face my attacker and ensuring that he was far from my boy. My beautiful, brilliant boy who didn't want to be far from his monstrous father, didn't want to leave me to fend for myself. Leave her alone! Screamed my 10-year-old son as he charged at Henry. The boy wailed at his father's side, lamping him with limp, boyish fists that weren't tough enough to even leave a dent in the 6-foot-tall brute. And all that happened next happened in a flash too quick for me to stop. I managed only to cry out, "Wait!" as Henry turned away from me and towards his boy. The man had a fogginess in his eyes that made me wonder for a haunting moment if it were really him at all. I think about it all the time, in fact. Think about how his eyes had glazed over. The memory changes every time that I reflect upon it, but there have been times when I've been absolutely certain, and I was certain at the time too. Certain that the white pinpricks of the glassy-eyed man were sitting in the skull of my abusive ex-husband. No, I whispered. A BMW was hurtling down the village's main road at a too rapid pace. It was 11 o'clock on a Monday evening. The streets were otherwise devoid of life in that nothing ever happens here village. But of course there was a car on that road at that moment. As Henry, puppeteered by a horrifying entity from beyond the bounds of the universe itself, yelled primally and pushed our son out into the main road. The BMW's brakes squealed, but it was fruitless. The boy went under the wheels and the vehicle lurched upwards as it rolled over him. I remember very little from the black fog which followed. A grief thicker and heavier than the one that I endured the first time Tommy had died. Not just because I witnessed it with my own eyes, but because it happened in such a horrific way, and because I had been powerless to stop it. I remember vaguely attempting to squeeze the boomerang while screeching in torment, but the device didn't take me back in time. Not even when I squeezed hard enough to leave black and blue bruising on my palm. My first memory after it all was this psychiatric hospital, which is now my home. It was many weeks later by this point, and I had been practically catatonic during that time. Of course, I had found my way here. The irony of ending up where Henry had wanted me to go isn't lost on me. He, of course, is rotting in prison for murdering our son. Whether he did so of his own volition or under the influence of that creature with glassy eyes, I do not know, and I do not want to know. The boomerang is gone. Henry's gone. Tommy's gone. And I feel as I've lost more than I did the first time because I'm not just a shell this time. I'm a shell possessed and haunted by that glassy-eyed man from beyond the bounds of the universe. He keeps watch over me, even after I let the boomerang drop to the floor of the hospital many days ago now. It was taken away by some business person visiting their relative. It's gone now. Why won't the creature leave me alone? And why won't somebody just let me die? And this is hell. I'm living in hell.